euphemism in game. Now that sounds like a mouthful. Let me explain to you what that means. Essentially, when you're talking to a girl, it's not about what you say, it's about what she hears, okay? And the two are very distinct. I'll give you an obvious example, which was there was a time I was doing a set in Vegas. I pulled a girl's hair and I said, "You have great hair." And it was like a very like sort of intense sexual moment. But what she heard was, "You have gray hair," as in like she had gray colored hairs, right? So she was actually offended by this and she said to her friend, "Oh my God, I can't believe he said I have gray hair," etc. In that moment, it did not matter that what I actually said was a compliment. It did not matter that it had a completely different vibe behind it. Correcting and trying to apologize for what I said didn't even really have meaning because she had heard this thing, she had an emotional reaction to it, and now in the next moment in the interaction, I had to deal with the emotional interaction to what she thought she heard. Okay, now that's a very, very obvious example where she actually misheard me. But the same thing is happening over and over again on a more subtle level where you're trying to say one thing or you're communicating factually and what the girl's hearing has an emotional context to it. Or you're trying to communicate emotionally and she's not picking up on that and she's just treating it as bare fact. Okay, so it's very, very important that you're conscientious of not what's going on verbally in the real world, even so much as what's going on in her mind. Okay, I'll give you two quick definitions to kind of make it clear. We won't linger on them too much, but they're two words. One is denotation, which is the actual literal meaning of a word, and the second is connotation, which is the way it's perceived by the person hearing it. When you're in game, you want to be dealing a lot with connotation, their perception of the word, rather than the literal meaning. In fact, if anything, it's more important to get the connotation right than the denotation. More important to get the appearance and their perception right than the literal meaning of what you're saying. Now let me give you some examples of this. One example is, say you're trying to pull a girl home. You wouldn't say, "Let's go back to my place and fool around." Because if you say that, she's going to think that she's being perceived as very slutty. She's going to think it's a foregone conclusion. She's going to think there's pressure on her, all those kind of things. She's going to, in her mind, think not, "It just happened, we're having an adventure." She's going to think, "I decided to sleep with this guy, I am a slut." On the other hand, if you're like, "I know a really cool place where we could hang out and chill and actually get to know each other without like a bunch of drunk people bumping into us all the time," right? Now, that's going to be your place also. But by phrasing it that way, by phrasing it in terms of the experience she's going to have, by letting it just happen, by letting her agree to it as sort of without having like agreed to sleep with you overtly, she's going to be very, very likely to actually go along with it instead of very, very likely to have resistance. Great story I know along these lines was actually a Tyler story years ago. He was with a student pulling two girls, and they're in a taxi in New York City. And they're about to go to the student's place and just go like drink and probably hook up or whatever. So Tyler sits in the back with the two girls to keep their vibe up, gets the student in the front, and he says to the student, "Tell the taxi driver where to go." And so they should be all good. They're about to be on their way. Student turns around and says, "I'm telling him my place, right?" And the girls freak out. The girls completely like just like can't handle it. Like, no, we can't go to your place. No, right? And so Tyler calms them down, talks to the guy, says, "Okay, it's cool. We're just gonna go, go watch a movie, guys. You guys like movies? Cool. Yeah, no big deal. Okay, tell the taxi driver where we're gonna go to watch the movie, right?" And the student turns to the taxi driver, gets a little confused, turns back to Tyler and goes, "But I'm telling him that we're watching the movie at my place, right?" And the girls again freak out because the student's just not getting it. Anyway, they go through it one more time. Eventually, Tyler calms him down and he says to the student, "Give the man an address," right? And the guy is about to, he's like, "Oh, we're going to," and he turns around and he goes, "Wait, I'm confused. I'm telling the address to my apartment, right?" And the girl's like, "Pull over, we're getting out," and they leave. And so because they were completely down to hang out, completely down to watch a movie, completely down to do all kinds of whatever, but as soon as you said the word "my place" or "my apartment," that was a red flag for them. That particular word said to them, this is just for sex, this makes us slutty, those kind of things. So that word had a particular meaning. The euphemism, "let's go watch a movie," "let's hang out," those kind of things had a different connotation, a different meaning to them, and that made it much, much more acceptable. All right, similarly, from the very start of the set, if you walked up to a girl and you're like, "Hey, you're hot, I know nothing about you, but based on my objectification of you, I think I might like to sleep with you." Now, there's a certain array of girls that will find that comical and amusing that you were so upfront, but for the most part, they're going to not receive that so well, right? On the other hand, if you happen to just comment on something, make a little small talk, give them a compliment here and there, and let the set unwind, let the interaction unfold in a slower, more natural, more organic way, they'd be very, very, very receptive to it, okay? So you have to understand the position that girls are in. Girls like sex a lot, possibly more than guys. However, girls have been socially conditioned, and actually you could look at this, if you go into the science, biologically conditioned even, to be not slutty, right? A guy back in history didn't want a girl that slept with every guy in the tribe, because if he had a kid with her, he wouldn't know it's his kid. And so she would have less value as a wife given that situation, right? So it's to a girl's benefit to maintain a reputation of being difficult to sleep with, not slutty, pure, those kind of things. And it has been very much historically and culturally. So you have to understand, girls are in this weird paradox where they want to have sex, but a lot of the things that lead to sex would make them seem slutty. So if you can solve the problem of helping the girl have sex without making it her fault, if you can make it just happen instead, you're going to do very, very well. All right, and that's what this euphemism is for. And so that's where, in movies and stuff like that, do you want to come up for a cup of coffee is different than do you want to come up and sleep with me? But it means a very, very similar thing. So what I would encourage you to do is be very, very aware of these types of phrases in game. Be very, very aware that when you're communicating with guys or you're communicating in business, you're usually just communicating the literal meaning. You're trying to get the point across as quickly as possible. When you're communicating with a girl, you do need to convey factual information, but it's much more important that you convey a certain emotional journey. It's much more important the series of emotions they go through with you, and that's pleasant and positive and building in the right way, than it is that you communicate exactly logically. Another quick example just to close, when I was in Vegas, the way I would pull almost every set is I would introduce this idea of, I'm kind of tempted to take you to my favorite place in Vegas, but I'm not entirely sure yet, let's take it slow, right? Now, what does that say? Tempted to take you to my favorite place in Vegas means we're going to leave the club, we're going to go on an adventure together. And girls know what that means. Girls know at their core, when they leave the club with a guy who they're attracted to, especially a guy they've made out with, they know where that's likely to go. But it's not so explicit that they feel slutty about it, right? And then the other thing I did is I said, oh, not yet, we're going to take it slow. And then I bring it up later. I spend more time with them first, so that the story in their mind is that they earned it rather than it just being something I would offer to anyone. So instead of just logically conveying what I'm going to do, I gave them plausible deniability for being slutty, I gave them an experience, and I gave them a good narrative for it. And because of those elements, they're very likely to say yes, whereas if I just broached it directly, the likelihood of a no instead would be very, very high.